I think you're
Okay.
Okay. So I've been reading the book by Passing by Nella Larson, and so far the biggest theme in the book is trying to decide like who you are and like passing as a white person or a black person. And pretty much in the book there's three people who have like the choice of being able to pass. And those people are Irene, who's the main character. She is light skinned. Um, she's light skinned enough to pass as a white person, and she only chooses to be a white person when she's alone, and she doesn't take advantage of this. She does it like when she needs to be, like in the beginning of the book when she was about to pass out. A kind driver helps her and takes her to the Drayton Hotel, which is an all-white hotel, but she uses her ability to pass as white to get a drink and be able to cool down and like relax and not faint. Um, but she marries a black person and stays within the black community. The other person is Claire, who is a childhood friend who used to live in Chicago with Irene, but she later moves after the death of her father. Claire is also light skinned, but she chooses to identify as white because she thinks it's easier and she'll encounter less hardships. And so she marries a white person, and her husband doesn't even know that of her like black history. And Gertrude is another childhood friend, and she is also light skinned enough to pass as white, marries a white person, but she does tell her husband that she could identify as black, and her husband is okay with that. So, like, what are the main themes in your book?
Yeah, no, I think one of the main themes in the autobiography of an ex-colored man, which Chris and I are both reading, has to do with racial identity, which kind of has to do with who you are. The reason that racial identity is such a big theme in this book is at the beginning of the book, the narrator doesn't even know that he's African American. So he's half white, half African American, and he doesn't even know this. And kind of when he figures this out, he kind of doesn't know who he is anymore, and he doesn't know where he is in society, because the way society worked was that you were either a first class citizen, which was a white American, or a second class citizen, which was an African American. And kind of a quote from the beginning part of chapter 2, which I think kind of captures this, is and this is the dwarfing, warping, distorting influence which operates upon each and every colored man in the United States. He is forced to take his outlook on all things, not from the viewpoint of a citizen, or a man, or even a human being, but from the viewpoint of a colored man. And I think this kind of just like shows exactly what the viewpoint of a colored man was back then. And this kind of figuring out his identity causes a big problem for the narrator in the book, because he kind of struggles between whether or not he is an African American or a citizen, because he's trying to battle between those, because he can't be both. And I think this is why near the end of the book he kind of starts to travel around the world to try to figure out his roots, because he wants to become more accepting of it, because in the beginning part he wasn't accepting of his identity, and then later in the book he tries to become more accepting of his identity.
So another big theme of the book that I think also relates to his race, his identity. I think his family identity. He has a tough time having a relationship because he doesn't have a father, or he does, but he rarely sees him. He doesn't really understand what his relationship with the father should be like, because he hasn't had one his whole life. And then when his father does visit, he doesn't know what to think. He's excited, obviously, but he doesn't fully like grasp the concept that like this is my father, who I should have like be loving to. And instead he decides, he says hi, he's like happy or whatever, and then he is immediately goes back to his focusing on his life, and he goes to the duet that he has for that he has to play. He's playing with this crush, so he's more focused on his life as opposed to his father. And I think it's interesting that if you haven't seen your father in however many years it was, such a long time, you wouldn't be focused on yourself. You'd really be interested in like connecting with him after so long. That's just my view. His relationship with his mother is great. It's like a loving relationship, but I feel like it's not fully like genuine until he begins to read, and he reads Uncle Tom's Cabin, and this kind of opens him up to like his roots and his race, as Grant was saying, his identity. He's finally starting to understand, and this is when he begins to understand this concept. He's able to actually have a real, like, genuine conversation with his mom, and I think that is when they fully start to like connect, because up until this point, his mom had not really said much about race. She didn't even mention to him the fact that he was light skinned, that he was black. And I think that she never really knew how to talk to his son at such a young, her son at such a young age, because like she just didn't know how it would affect him. So she probably thought that it would be better for him to find out himself. But then when he finally does find out for himself, he asks a lot of questions, and he's very interested. And his mother and his relationship is finally like coming together. And I think he and his mother's relationship kind of carries him through his life and his struggles. Like, he's always able to talk to his mom, and his mom is kind of like a matriarch, like in like their family, because she's powerful, and she knows people. And then I think up until her death, he's able to kind of understand his identity and like cope with it. But after his mom dies, it's just like a whole new. It's like he had to restart and start over and like find new people, because that was all he had. Like, his mom was like his only family member he knew. I think it was very hard for him. But then towards the end of the book, he's finally able to like find himself, like through just himself, and no one else's help. Just like find his roots and visit places and find out more about himself. And I think that's a really important theme throughout the book.